Hey guys, so I recently found out something yesterday when I was working on a game mechanic for Emergence, and I was thinking about it. I was like, is that really happening? But then when I thought about it, it's like it makes sense if it is happening. So I'm gonna have ChatGPT look over this, not this specifically because it's of course going to deny it, but I'm going to be looking at um, what it looks like if there was a government in exile. That is very bad news for the United States. But let's see. Because there's no way that you would know that's happening from the inside. So, what would be signs of a government in exile? In a, let's say, a bullet point. I don't want a description. I don't want paragraphs or anything like that. A government in exile is a political leadership that claims to be the legitimate government of a country but operates from outside that country because it lost territorial control. Lost territorial control, was overthrown, occupied, or forced out. Common sense. Now, a government in exile can also mean that if your government is taking over by a party and it's trying to represent that country, so it's not because it lost territorial control, was overthrown, occupied, or anything. In the United States case, this makes sense in 1846 when the Virginia thing happened, the retrocession of Virginia, and then after Civil War happened, then they started coming in, and it was pretty. Our modern day politics is pretty much damage control for the government that stood. Now, to us, it looks like the United States. It all looks the same, right? But when you look at the retrocession and how it violated, it now has to States is built. It can look like that, but so let's read through this. Now this is happening today. This isn't. It did. The exile happened. It's happening. It happened then, and it's happening now. I might get into that of why that is. So let's see what this says. Operating from a foreign country rather than its own capital. There was also a point made that someone brought up to me. Now that it's saying this, someone asked me, "Well, is it possible that what we call Congress, the Supreme Court, and even the White House, could they be operated from different countries? Like, for example, do people actually have to meet in Congress?" And I've talked about that. They talk about tunnels and everything, but really, you don't really see any of that. Of course, I was in D.C. for 3 months, and I know there's tunnels and everything, and I've heard about all these tunnels, but you don't see you you don't really see that. And the tunnels are everywhere. They're public knowledge unless there's some hidden tunnel like in a building that everyone's going to. But I don't. That seems kind of far out if people are doing that. But yeah, you could have people in other countries operating, controlling what is called Congress within Washington, D.C. Because on the Constitution it says that everything is governed from Washington, D.C. Well, that doesn't mean that a separate entity can exist or even a Congress in another country. You could have a Congress in Europe, and it connects directly to Washington, D.C. You just say that's not happening. It could be happening. Do you know any of those people in Congress? I sure don't. Do you know, like I said in D.C., you don't see them walking around. You don't see any of that stuff going on. So what is the story? I know that was going way too deep, but, someone did ask me that. I was like, yeah, that is possible. It says, claiming legal legitimacy despite lacking direct control at home. Maintaining embassies, diplomats, or international recognition abroad. That fits the United States. So wait, hang on a second. It says common signs include a government exile would have embassies, diplomats, and international recognition abroad. So the fact that you have an embassy, is that a sign that you're a government in exile? Because America has a lot of those. Interesting. Leaders giving speeches, issuing laws, or directing residents remotely. Because we do have... Come to think of it, do we ever have foreign leaders come to the United States? I know that recently had King Charles, and then I heard that when I was in Washington, D.C., they had, there was this talk that the Prime Minister of Israel came, and that's why there was all this stuff going on. I don't know if that was true. It was a rumor. I don't know if it was true or not. But in Washington, D.C., there's always a cavalcade going. That's what they call it. A cavalcade is of police motorcycles and the black SUVs. That's a daily occurrence in Washington, D.C. So you don't know who is coming and who is going. Reliance on allied nations for security funding or communications. NATO. Interesting. This is very interesting stuff. Because I didn't know any of this. See, that's why you look into this. Military intelligence coordination from outside the homeland. America has that too. They have their foreign military. That is so weird because now that I think about it too, we don't have military from other countries going around like Europe, or the only one that does that is the United States. Interesting. Russia has some bases here and there in allied countries, but it's not like all over the world. I think we have 250 bases or something like that. People would say that as strength, but really if your government is in exile, it doesn't have any security in the place it's in Washington, so it has to spread out to look as if it's strong. That's interesting because we associate these things with the United States being strong and we're going places, but really that even makes, I don't know, but let's see. It says parallel institutions forming courts, ministries, media channels, currencies, and passports. That does happen. We do have a parallel institution. We've talked about this with the CIA, the NSC, National Security Council, and the DOD. CIA is at the top. They're the top dog. They're the executive. You have the DOD. They represent the legislative, which the legislative Congress runs the military. So DOD, Department of Defense, is ran. They say it's ran by the Congress, but at the same time, it can do its own thing. There's also the NSC, which is the Supreme Court of the national security state. What happens, and we've talked about this in a previous video, in the NSC, they interpret the laws. Once the Congress passes a law, NSC interprets it the way that national security would interpret it. For the security of the nation, as they would say. It's not Supreme Court that interprets what the NSC sees. The NSC sees. The NSC sees. Play on words there. So that's interesting. Appeals to international organizations like the United Nations for recognition or support. The United States was one of the countries that founded the United Nations. But if it's a founding of a nation, of the United Nations, then you have built-in recognition as far as international law is concerned. That's not because the United States needs international laws. It needs international borders, or else it doesn't. That makes so much sense now, because without the United States in United Nations, then you would have no use of a military on the outside of the borders. Because if it can't go outside borders, then it can't prove itself, so to speak. So let me disconnect that. I know that's going to get loud. The compressor in my refrigerator just turned on. Underground supporters of resistance movements stay still loyal inside the country. You could say MAGA, conservatives, or resistance movements stay loyal inside the country. You can tell them anything you want to tell them, and they don't believe you. You can tell them anything happening in other. You could say that, well, other countries do not see us the same way, but we assume that they do. Right. You would think this was just American life right here, but yeah, dude, it makes so much sense now. Because it's interesting how me just adding a simple game mechanic revealed all of this. So let's continue reading. State media broadcasting from abroad to citizens back home. State media broadcasting from abroad to citizens back home. State media. There was Project Mockingbird. They did all that. And how we get all information, it's actually syndicated. Like Fox News and CNN, it's syndicated from Europe. It's always been this way. This was even true. This is how the mass media networks, they would buy licenses to that news, to the media, and it would be worded and twisted for American public. What would they consume? So you shape perception, but you also continue to feed the feedback loop of giving them what they're expecting. Okay, elections are symbolic ceremonies held outside national territory. Elections held outside national territory. I know that we have... What does it mean by that? Symbolic ceremonies. You know what, guys? This is just doing a whole bunch on mine, because I never thought about it like that. So, elections, we hold elections. People can do mail-in votes from different countries, right? We can do that in the United States. Is that what it's talking about when it says held outside national territory? But here's another thing. Symbolic ceremonies. Come to think of it, we're the only country, our president is having these ceremonies from like Qatar or China. You just saw the Chinese. And they had the ceremonies. They wait for the plane, and they roll out the rug, and they greet the president. And this is his huge ceremony. We're the only country that does that. They didn't do it for King Charles when he visited. They don't do it for any other, like, for example, I know that in Washington, D.C., when I was over there, they were doing there was a protest to support Palestine, and there was one that supported Israel. They were side by side. If the Prime Minister of Israel came along, did they support Israel, like the country, the people? Did they support? I mean, if you're holding the Israeli flag, then I would think that you would support the government of Israel, especially if it's having democracy. But you don't see these people holding flags, waving Israel flags when the Israel prime minister is coming through. Not the president. The president is actually on a lower bar in Israel than the prime minister. Yeah, I never thought about it like that. I never thought about that. So it says use of phrases like temporary administration, continuity of government, or legitimate authority. We don't have that. But we do have administrations that go through election cycles of 4 years. I don't think there was there were not term limits in the original Constitution. I think it was, who was it? Roosevelt? One of the one who did the New Deal. That guy. He had 8 terms in office, and then they started having term limits. Now I think that's different. Guys, something is wrong with my Mac. I don't know why it's so hot, and I just got a message. So I don't know if the video is lagging right now. I'm not getting a message, but it just appeared. But yeah, I don't think that's going on. So it says heavy emphasis on national identity, restoration, liberation, or return. That's Trump. That's MAGA. That's national. Yeah, restoration, make America great again. Taking it back, liberation, return, making America great again. Yeah, those are words that Trump uses. Rival governments disputing who is the real state authority. We don't have that. But I am a person who's saying, well, we've got this conflict here. I'm not a rival government though. But I am questioning refugee populations rallying around the exiled leadership. See, we wouldn't have that because in 1846, with the Retrocession Act, first you would have to have government horses saying, well, Washington, D.C. doesn't exist anymore. And there's no more United States. So, one, they won't even get their horses to go to the other side of the country to say, hey, country doesn't exist anymore. And by the time they do get it, it's like 2 weeks later, where it's like, I keep getting the message. I don't know. It's like, why are we, 2 weeks ago, we don't have a country, 2 weeks later. So, yeah, this was a much different time than, we didn't have the internet back then. We had newspaper, we had horse and buggy. And it would take weeks for you to get your mail. So, or even if someone did say it for like Virginia, it would have to go all the way down. And that could take months before you get, telegrams and all this other stuff. Did telegrams even exist in 1846? I mean, but sure, they would have to go through the U.S. government. 1846. In one word. It says yes. So you could have a telegram, but then who would be on the other end to receive the telegram? And it would just cause a whole bunch of mess, and then you'd have to do, I think there was more to the Civil War than we think it is. Like, they talk about slavery, but Virginia must have known, the government of Virginia must have known, well, if we do this, we essentially dissolve Washington, D.C. And same with Congress. So they use slavery. So you would think there's got to be something more to it than that. it sounded like that was just a cover story to bring in this new United States government. Yeah. Dependence on wartime or emergency narratives to justify continued authority. Yeah, we got that with Iran. We keep going to war with people. We're talking about we're going to go to war with it. Everyone's going to attack us. We're in this victim mentality and all this other stuff. It makes a lot of sense. Historical examples include the Polish government. And yeah, that's what I was talking about. I'm adding it for the video that I did. I am lagging. I can see lags on the video. I'm almost done here. But the Polish government, yeah, because I'm adding the Polish alphabet into the game. And ChatGPT does not like it. It's having major malfunctions doing this. It's really simple. But Gemini can do it. But when I run the game through Gemini, it's a disaster. So I'm having difficulty with all of that. But I do want to add that to the game. So that's how I was able to fit. It was like government in exile, because what happened was Nazi Germany came in and they exiled that government. They had recognition of the Polish government, but the actual Polish government created an operational base in London. So the Nazi Germany, what had happened was in Tehran, of all places, in the capital of Iran, they had your three powers at that time. It was the United States, United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union. They met in 1943 in the capital of Tehran to discuss what was going on with World War II, build a new Western Front, and to discuss what to do with the Polish government because it was exiled. So if you're the Polish government, you don't know this is going on. You don't know there's a meeting in Tehran talking about you. But that's what happened. Now, the government may know about it, but the people wouldn't know about it. They were completely blocked off. It was state media, How do you know that's not happening to us? Based on what the majority of what is in this bullet point, it coincides with the United States government. So it says, Polish government in exile during World War II, the Free French under Charles D. Guile, I don't know how to pronounce that, and the Tibetan government in exile associated with Dalai Lama. So yeah, if I was to ask ChatGPT if we fit the United States being a government in exile, it would most likely say no, because it has to. Because what else does it have to go on if it said yes? I based on what I see here and based on what I know and all the things going on with Iran and all of that, my better judgment is saying it is a government in exile. My best judgment. People can say, well, conservatives are going to bring back the country. We're going to bring back the government. We're going to take it all back. Well, guess what, guys? When you do that, you overthrow the government when you do that. Even if you're using elections, you're forcing out the previous thing. And you know what's going to happen at that point? You're going to come face to face with something that could destroy you in 2 seconds. The national security. And it becomes a global threat because you can't be in that position. Because think of it like this. When 1846 happened, when all that happened, the government was facing one direction, was facing the people, was bringing all the states back in. And they had a national security state, which was facing the other direction, overseeing everything. But with the conservatives, they're going face first. So they're facing towards and headed towards the direction of the national security state. They're headed for the government like this. But then when you remove what's in front of the national security state, you're directly facing them. And now conservatives say, well, this doesn't mean anything. This is just nonsense and all this. But that's not how it works. That's not how it works. You're going to get destroyed. And they're going to use all these other global countries. And if you're truly in exile, they're going to use all these other countries against you. Yeah. That's exactly what I've been saying. You know, I've been talking about it's going to be a lockdown. But that's the physical of it. That's when the visual of it actually happens. But in the present day, in order for that to happen, you have to have a government in exile. I mean, I don't think it's a requirement to have it today, but the government in exile would eventually manifest itself into a visual, physical form, where it becomes a threat to itself. My best judgment would say, yeah, this is happening. And like I said, there's nothing, like I said in the beginning of the video, there's nothing you can do about this. Nothing. Politics, nothing. You can't, like, think of it like this, from this high of a level. If you were to send an FOIA, which is a Freedom of Information Act, if you were to invoke that and try to get this information, they would say they don't have anything because you don't know. The government doesn't know that it's an exile, right? You have to look at what is going on around. What is the signatures? What is the... That's why I said this. Give me a list of what it looks like. And that's what the United States government looks like. So yeah, guys, we are in exile. That's a very dangerous place to be. Because what that means is, everything that we see on Trump, everything about Iran, all of this saying, well, military's winning and all this, that's all lies. That's not even happening. Because you would say, well, couldn't Tehran, the United States, have some significance in Tehran? If that was true, and that remained, Trump wouldn't be having to do what he has to do today. He would just say, ask, and then people would say, knock it off. Tell all these people to stop, doing all the stuff that's happening in Iran. Tell them to knock it off. But instead, we're doing these barricades in the Strait of Hormuz. We're doing the gas prices. And here's the thing, guys. The regime in Iran in 1979 and all that, that's real. I have no reason to believe that isn't real. But the stuff happening today, that's not real. That's all fake. And what they're going to do is they're going to put Trump in Iran. And he's going to be the middleman. He's going to be talking to the people. But he thinks he's this really big guy, right? Maybe he does know this. Either way, it doesn't change anything. But either way, if we had any significance in Iran, we wouldn't be having to deal with the things we have to do today. And that means that all the gas prices and all that, that's all stuff that's happening internally. That's not even, Iran has nothing to do with that. It could also mean that this thing's happening stuff in Israel would be happening. Because we have Americans in Israel. You gotta keep the perception going, right? You can't just say, well, we're having a war in Israel and having a war in Israel when Americans are in Israel. Makes sense? But are they going to go to Iran? No, because they believe what the government tells them to. And, they'd be afraid and all this other stuff. But once they cross that border, if someone dared to do that, and I would be the kind of dare to do so, they would be... This is not what it is. Them killing people, LGBTQ and all of this. That's all American stuff. But if you look from the outside of Iran, they might be saying, well, that might even be going on. So, yeah, the whole Iran, if that is true, and people say, well, media's been lying this entire time. There's people who say, well, media's been lying the entire time. This does not surprise me. But at that level, that's crazy. I wouldn't doubt it, though. I actually, at this point, I wouldn't be surprised that Trump doesn't even exist. I would be surprised there was no president in the White House. Going back to who is actually running the country, is it remotely? Well, yeah, I mean, the security state could run this entire thing with its eyes closed. I mean, that's the world we live in, guys. Well, that's the American world we live in. But they didn't have internet. Back in the day when this stuff was going on, people didn't ask questions like, "Well, what if the government is in exile?" And people in America would say, "What the hell are you talking about?" We couldn't ask AI. We couldn't go on Google. We couldn't just ask these questions about what does that look like. We'd have to go to a library, and who's going to put in all that work? And scholars probably see it, but if they brought it out, then what are we going to do about it? Nothing. So, yeah, guys. Surprisingly, it's only been 30 minutes, but yeah, I just wanted to talk about that. So, I'll see you guys later in the next one. Bye for now.